The power reading on day 9 was 11%. Varathsa looked at it the way she had been looking at it for 9 days, which was without expression. Because expression required energy, she had stopped spending on things that did not help the situation. And the situation was not helped by the way her face arranged itself when she looked at numbers. 11%. She had a navigator's relationship with numbers. They were not good or bad. They were positions. They were where you were, not where you wished you were, and the difference between those two things was the only useful information available to a person trying to get somewhere. Where she was, a science vessel called the Enduring Question, drifting in deep space at coordinates 7 gamma reach, approximately 19 light hours from the nearest inhabited system. Crew complement, 41. Current surviving crew, 4. Power reserves, 11%, depleting at a rate that her calculations placed at life support failure in approximately 40 hours. Where she wished she did not enter into it. The reactor containment failure had happened on day 1. She did not think about it often because thinking about it often was not useful, and was in fact the opposite of useful. What she thought about instead was the problem in front of her, which was the same problem it had been since day 1, which was that 4 people needed to not die in a ship that was running out of power in a region of space where they were not supposed to be anyone's problem. On day 1 she had sent a standard distress signal on the Concord emergency frequency. On day 3, the Concord relay hub had acknowledged receipt. The acknowledgement was formal and correct and included a reference number. On day 5, the relay hub had sent a response. It was also formal and correct and said, in the precise language of institutional communication, that the Enduring Question was located outside Concord jurisdictional boundaries, that the appropriate oversight authority for the relevant coordinates was the Velhari Cooperative, and that the Velhari Cooperative had been notified. The Velhari Cooperative had not responded. Not on day 5, not on day 6, not on any of the 4 days since. Varathsa was a navigator. She dealt in what was, not what should be. What was that 9 days had passed and no one had come. On day 7, she had started calculating something different. She had taken the salvaged transmitter that Sarath had built from components stripped from non-essential systems over 4 careful days, and she had spent 2 days mapping the signal coverage of every monitoring station she could identify within range of its power output. The transmitter was not strong. Its range was limited. Most of the stations she identified were Concord relay points, and she had learned what the Concord relay did with her signals. There was one other station, Coalition, edge of their monitored space. It was not the appropriate authority. It was not within jurisdiction. Its frequency range technically should not have overlapped with the band the transmitter could produce. But technically and actually were different things when you were an experienced navigator working with salvaged equipment in a desperate situation. And Varathsa had spent 2 days calculating the precise modulation that would bleed her signal into the adjacent band that the Coalition station monitored. She sent it on day 9 at 400 hours. Then she went back to watching the power readings. She did not expect anyone to come. She had sent the signal because it was the only thing left to do, and because a navigator's obligation was to exhaust every possible heading before accepting that there were no headings left. But the probability of the signal reaching the right receiver, and the receiver acting on it, and the acting vessel reaching them before 40 hours elapsed, was a calculation she had run 3 times and not liked any of the 3 results. She watched the power reading sit at 11%. She watched it become 10.8. She waited. Dana Reeves was on hour 11 of a 14-hour shift when the signal came in, and she almost classified it as interference. This was not a failure of attention. Dana had been attentive for 19 years, which was how long she had been sitting at monitoring consoles at Signal Station Outer Reach and listening to the dark, and inattention was not a thing she did. She had developed, over 19 years, the specific quality of attention that belongs to people who have listened to the same thing for long enough that they know every sound it makes, including the sounds it is not supposed to make. The signal came in as edge noise on the adjacent reception band. Her equipment was not configured to monitor that band. Her equipment was doing so anyway, in the way that equipment at the edge of its design specifications sometimes does, picking up what it was not built to pick up because the boundary between what it was built to do and what it could do was softer than the specifications suggested. She was about to flag it as interference when the rhythm stopped her. She knew interference. She knew it in the way you know something you have been sorting from signal for 19 years. This was not interference. The pattern was structured, deliberate, the specific irregularity of something that had been shaped by intention rather than produced by noise. She ran it through the first analysis filter, unclassified signal, non-standard frequency. She ran it through the second, structured pattern, non-random. She ran it through the third, probable communication, language unknown, source coordinates available. She sat with this for a moment. Gerald was on the console. He had been on the console for 11 years. He was a small cactus of a type that did not require much water and did not require much light and did not require much of anything, which was why he had survived 11 years on a monitoring station where Dana sometimes forgot to eat. She watered him every Tuesday. She did not know exactly why she kept a cactus on a space station. She had brought him on a Tuesday 11 years ago from a market on the transit hub, and he had come home with her, and he had been on the console since. When her shift got complicated, she talked to him in a low voice, not for any reason she could fully explain, just because it helped her think. She said very quietly, "I think someone is out there, Gerald." Then she started working. She pulled the source coordinates from the signal data and put them against the jurisdictional map. The yellow highlight appeared automatically, outside coalition boundaries. Her system flagged it the way it flagged everything, without judgment, just information. She checked the Concord relay logs. The signal had been there before her, 9 days before her, filed under non-priority, outside jurisdiction, Velhari Cooperative notified. The timestamp sat on her screen in the plain font that systems use for everything, disasters and scheduling requests alike. 9 days ago. Dana looked at the timestamp. She looked at the signal data. She looked at the timestamp again. She picked up her direct line to Coalition Signal Command and reported the signal in full. She gave them the coordinates, the frequency, the analysis results, the Concord relay timestamp. She was thorough. She had been thorough for 19 years. She did not see a reason to stop now. Command's response came back in 6 minutes. It was professionally worded. The signal was outside coalition jurisdiction. It had already been logged by the Concord relay. The appropriate authority had been notified. Signal station outer reach should log the reception and continue monitoring. Dana logged the reception. She continued monitoring. On her secondary screen, she opened a new calculation. The signal contained embedded telemetry and the power variations of the transmission itself. Not intentionally embedded, she was fairly certain. The broadcasting equipment was producing signal strength variations that encoded information about the power source driving it. 19 years of signal analysis had given her the ability to read this the way a doctor reads a pulse, not perfectly, not with the precision of direct measurement, but well enough. She worked the calculation for 22 minutes. Power reserves on the broadcasting vessel, approximately 11%. Rate of depletion based on what she could infer about minimum life support requirements. She ran the math 3 times because the math mattered, and she wanted to be sure she was reading it correctly. 40 hours, possibly less. She looked at the Concord relay timestamp. 9 days ago. The Velhari Cooperative had had 9 days. She opened a different channel. Not command, not the relay. the duty frequency for the CDS threshold, the nearest coalition vessel with deep space rescue capability. 31 hours from the signal source at maximum speed. She knew this because she had already calculated it. A young voice answered. Ensign Mensa, duty officer. She told him what she had. She told him the coordinates. She told him the power curve calculation and the 40-hour estimate. She told him the Concord relay timestamp and what it meant in terms of how long the Velhari cooperative had been notified and had not responded. Mensa said, "Hold on." She held on. 4 minutes of the sounds of the threshold's bridge coming through faintly in the background. Voices she could not make out clearly. A door. Then a different voice lower, with the particular steadiness of someone who had spent a long time making decisions quickly. "This is Commander Adara. Send me the signal data and your power curve calculation." She sent it. He was quiet for 90 seconds. She waited. She was good at waiting. He said, "What is your confidence on the 40-hour estimate?" She said, "High, possibly optimistic." A pause, not the pause of someone deciding. The pause of someone confirming something they had already decided. He said, "We are moving. Keep the line open." Dana said, "Commander, this is outside jurisdiction. Command told me to log it and continue monitoring." Adara said, "I heard what Command said. Send me the coordinates." She sent the coordinates. She watched the threshold's transponder signal appear on her display and begin to move. She calculated the speed against the distance. 29 hours if they held it. She looked at Gerald. She said, "Okay." Commander Yusuf Adara had been in coalition service for 24 years, and in that time he had developed the specific quality of a person who does not waste motion on the space between deciding and doing. His crew had learned this about him early. They knew, when his posture changed in the particular way it changed when he had finished assessing a situation, that the assessment was complete and motion was already happening. They were moving before he finished the order. That was how it worked. He filed the mission report as required, listing the authority under which he was acting. Coalition Humanitarian Protocol 7, which permitted coalition vessels to render aid to persons in life-threatening situations regardless of jurisdictional boundaries, provided the commanding officer accepted personal responsibility. He accepted personal responsibility. He did this on one line of the report, in plain language, without elaboration. His left hand, the prosthetic, signed the authorization in the system the way it always did, the small mechanical precision of it indistinguishable from the real thing to anyone who was not looking for the difference. He had stopped noticing the difference himself some years ago, which he considered an appropriate accommodation. He briefed the crew in the main corridor outside the bridge. He told them what he knew: science vessel, 41 crew, 4 survivors, 9 days since the Concord relay logged the signal. Velhari cooperative notified 9 days ago. No response. He stated these facts in the same tone he used for all facts. His crew received them in the same way they received all facts, which was to use them as inputs and begin working. He had assigned Ensign Kofi Mensa to communications, because Mensa had something that Adara had been watching for 4 years and valued highly. He was young and patient, and when things got difficult, he did not fill the silence with words. He sat in the silence and waited for what came into it, and what came into it was usually more useful than what would have come out of words. Adara had seen this work 3 times in difficult situations, and he intended to use it again. Mensa had a photo of his grandmother on his personal comm. He had shown it to Adara once, not to share something personal, but because Adara had asked about his family, and Mensa was the kind of person who answered questions directly. The grandmother was 91 years old and tended a garden on a colony world 2 systems over. She had raised Mensa after his parents died when he was 4. She did not know exactly what he did in space. She knew he listened to people. She had told him once that she thought that was a good job. Adara thought it was too. At hour 18 of the transit, the message came from Coalition Command. Adara read it standing at his console. It formally acknowledged the Threshold's movement and requested him to hold position pending jurisdictional clarification from the conquered council. The language was polished and correct. It did not say "do not go." It said "please wait while we determine who is responsible for going." He filed a response acknowledging receipt. He did not hold position. He went back to the bridge and did not mention the message to anyone, because the message was not operationally relevant to the current situation, and the current situation was that 4 people had approximately 40 hours of air and possibly less. On the enduring question, Varathsa was a navigator dealing in positions. Her position: a dead ship, day 9, power at 10.3%. 3 other people alive around her. Vethron at his station, working with the focused patience of a 60-year-old scientist who had spent his career being interested in things he did not yet understand and saw no reason to stop now despite his injuries, which were significant, and which he did not discuss except to answer direct questions about them with accurate information. Darius in the environmental section, 19 years old, monitoring the life support readings with the concentrated attention of someone who understood that the numbers on his screen were the difference between existing and not existing, and was taking that seriously. Sareth asleep in the corner of the communications bay on a folded thermal blanket, the salvaged transmitter beside her, because she had given everything she had to building and operating it, and her body had made the recovery decision without consulting her. Varathsa thought about Sareth's transmitter. 4 days of work with salvaged components from non-essential systems. She had never asked Sareth how she did it. She had just watched the transmitter come together under Sareth's hands and understood, in the way you understand someone who is very good at their work, that what she was watching was a person doing the best version of what they knew how to do under the worst version of the circumstances they were in. She hoped the signal had reached something. She was watching the power reading move from 10.3 toward 10.1 when she saw it on the salvaged transmitter's passive receiver. A beacon, Coalition, the kind that Coalition vessels broadcast always passively as standard protocol. Not a message, not a communication aimed at her, just the constant quiet signal of a ship announcing its presence to the dark. Moving. She ran the calculation. She ran it twice. She ran it a 3rd time because the 3rd time she wanted to be certain she was reading the vectors correctly and not seeing what she needed to see instead of what was there. She woke Sareth. Sareth looked at the calculation. She looked at Varathsa. She said nothing for a moment. She said, "It is close." "Yes," Varathsa said. "The margin is very close." "Yes." Sareth looked at the power reading. She looked at the beacon trajectory. She was a communications officer. She dealt in signals, in the question of whether what was sent was the same as what was received, and what was received was the same as what was understood. She said, "It is moving toward us." "Yes," Varathsa said, "it is moving toward us." That was different from day 8. At hour 22 of the Threshold's transit, Mensa established contact. The signal was weak. The translation matrix ran for 11 minutes before it achieved basic function on Dorath language structures, 11 minutes during which Mensa sat at his station and did not drum his fingers or check other screens or do any of the things people do when they are waiting and the waiting is uncomfortable. He sat. He waited. He watched the matrix work. When the translation achieved function, he opened the channel. He said, "We received your signal. We are on our way. Can you tell me your current life support status?" He waited. The distance between ships meant a delay in response. 4 minutes. Then a voice, female, carrying in its delivery the specific quality of a person who has been holding herself at a certain level of reserve for 9 days and is not going to drop that reserve on the basis of one transmission, because the reserve is not obstinacy. It is the careful management of the only resource she has complete control over. The voice gave him numbers, power reserves, atmosphere levels, temperature, status of each survivor. The numbers were delivered with the precision of a navigator who deals in positions. Mensa read the numbers. He did not let anything change in his voice. He looked at the numbers and understood what they meant and kept his voice exactly as it had been. He said, "Understood, we will be there." That was all. He did not add to it. He did not explain the math. He did not qualify the statement. He said, "We will be there," and then he waited. Adara was reading the numbers over his shoulder. He turned to his navigator. One word. "Faster." His navigator said, "We are already at maximum rated speed, sir." Adara said, "Find me something between maximum rated and maximum possible. There is always something." His navigator went back to his console. 14 minutes later, he reported an additional optimization in the drive routing that shaved 14 minutes off the arrival estimate. 14 minutes that were, on the current math, the difference between arriving before the life support failed and arriving after. Varath Shah's voice came through the channel again. She was responding to Mensa's last transmission. She said in Dorath, a word that the translation matrix rendered as acknowledged. Mensa had studied the translation matrix's handling of Dorath language in the 11 minutes it had taken to establish function, and he knew already that acknowledged was an approximation. The word the matrix was reaching for was something closer in texture to "I am still here." He noted this. He filed it in the way he filed things that mattered, not in any system, just in the part of himself that paid attention to what things meant beyond what they literally said. He said, "We are still coming." At hour 26, the enduring question appeared on the threshold's long-range visual sensors. Adara was on the bridge when it came up on the display. He looked at it without speaking. It was tumbling slowly, a gradual rotation that his ship's AI calculated had begun 6 days ago when the attitude control systems had failed. Dark mostly, one section lit, the life support section, amber against the black. Still lit. He stood and looked at it for a while. He thought about 4 people in the lit section of a tumbling ship, watching their power reading drop. He thought about 9 days. He said, "Docking team to the bay." The threshold reached the enduring question 3 hours and 40 minutes before the life support systems would have failed. Not 11 hours, 3 hours and 40 minutes. Dana's calculation had been accurate on day 1. The power curve had accelerated in the last 30 hours as the Dorath vessel's life support system had made automatic efficiency adjustments that reduced consumption while simultaneously masking the real rate of depletion. The adjustment was a system behaving as designed, trying to extend the window, succeeding at extending it, and in succeeding, obscuring how small the window had become. Varath Shah had known this. She had not communicated it to the threshold because there was nothing they could do about it, and because she had spent 9 days being a person who dealt in positions, and the position was what it was, and communicating it accurately would have increased the difficulty of the next 3 hours and 40 minutes for the people on the approaching ship without changing any of the variables. She was a navigator. She considered the variables available to her. She had kept the power reading to herself and focused instead on managing what she could manage, which was the life support efficiency, the power distribution, the small constant adjustments of a person trying to stretch something further than it was designed to go. The docking was not clean. The enduring question's slow tumble complicated the alignment, and the docking collar damage from the reactor event required the threshold's team to work around what they could not work through. 22 minutes to establish a secure seal. Mensa kept the channel open. He did not talk about the docking. He did not talk about the math. He asked Varath Shah about her work. She was a navigator. He asked her what they had been navigating toward. She told him, in the careful way of someone who has not talked about ordinary things for 9 days and finds the talking of ordinary things both strange and necessary, that they had been mapping a pulsar cluster in the outer reach. Vethron's research project. He had been studying the cluster for 12 years. Mensa said, "What does he hope to find?" 4 minutes of transit delay. Then Varath Saw's voice, and in it something that had not been there in the previous transmissions, something very small, very carefully managed, almost invisible unless you were listening for it. She said, "He says he does not know. He says that is why he is looking." The docking seal engaged. Adara led the boarding team through the collar and into the airlock and into the dark of the enduring question. Emergency lighting only. The smell of a ship that had been running on minimal systems for 9 days, the smell of recycled air and sealed compartments, and the particular quality of silence that a ship develops when most of the things that make a ship loud are no longer operating. He had been in damaged vessels before. The silence was always the thing that took adjustment, the absence of the sounds that normally meant a ship was alive. He found them in the life support section. Varath Saw was at a console. She was sitting the way a person sits when they have been at a station for 9 days, not because they were required to remain there, but because the station had become the fixed point, and leaving it had not been something she was willing to do. She had the posture of a person who has been managing something very difficult for a very long time and has not stopped. She looked up when the boarding team came through the door. She looked at them for a moment. 4 humans in emergency response suits carrying equipment and moving with the efficient purpose of people who have a job and are doing it. She said in Dorath, the word that meant I am still here. Dr. Chen, the Threshold's medical officer, reached her first. She moved the way she always moved in emergency response situations, with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times and knows that the most important thing is not to add to the difficulty of the person in front of her. She knelt to Varath Saw's eye level. She looked at her directly. She assessed what she was looking at and she put her hand out, palm up. Not to shake, not as protocol, just offered the way you offer something to someone when the words between you are thin and the gesture is thicker. Varath Saw looked at the hand. It was a human hand, the biological kind, small and pale with the marks of years of work on it. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put her own hand in it. Dr. Chen held it. She did not let go quickly. She held it for the time it took for the hold to mean something, and then she kept holding it a little longer. Behind them, Adara was reading the situation. Vethron at his station, injuries visible and significant. Darius in the environmental section, 19 years old, who had been monitoring numbers for 9 days and was now looking at the boarding team with the expression of someone whose body was only now beginning to register that the emergency had a different shape than it had had 9 minutes ago. Sarath asleep on the folded thermal blanket, the transmitter beside her. Adara looked at his medical officer. She looked back at him. They had worked together for 9 years. The look between them took half a second and communicated everything relevant. He said, "Tell me what you need." She told him. He provided it. Vethron was in the Threshold surgical bay 11 minutes later. His surgery lasted 3 hours. He survived it, which Dr. Chen afterward described to Adara as a function of several things, including the quality of her team and the quality of the Threshold's equipment, and the specific hardiness of someone who has spent 60 years being intensely interested in pulsars, and has therefore developed a relationship with the universe that the universe apparently feels some obligation to. Adara said he would put that in the report. She said, "Please do not." The Threshold moved away from the drifting hulk of the enduring question on a heading toward the nearest coalition medical facility, and the 4 Dorath survivors were distributed through the ship in the way that survivors distribute themselves after something long and difficult, which is each one finding the version of rest that their particular kind of surviving requires. Darius was asleep in a crew bunk, before anyone could ask if he wanted anything. Sareth was in the common room with something hot that the cook had made without being asked, sitting at a table and looking at it, and occasionally drinking it. The particular stillness of someone whose body has stopped requiring her to maintain a state of crisis, and is now insisting on something different. Vethron was in medical, recovering, which he was doing with the same focused patience he had brought to watching his instrument readings for 9 days. Verath was on the bridge. She had asked through Mensa whether she could be there. Adara had said yes without hesitation, which was how he said most things. She stood near the back of the bridge, not at a console, not in anyone's path, in the space that a navigator knows instinctively is the one you can occupy without disrupting the work happening around you. She watched Adara's crew. They were quiet and competent in the specific way of people who have done something difficult and are now doing the next thing. Nobody performed anything. Nobody explained themselves to her. They just worked. She watched them for a long time. She had been a navigator for 26 years. She had served on 7 vessels, under 4 different command structures, alongside crew members from 3 different species. She had a professional understanding of how bridge crews operated. She had not seen a bridge crew that operated like this. She thought about the Concord relay response on day 3, the formal language of it outside jurisdiction, appropriate authority notified. She thought about the Velhari cooperative and 9 days of silence. She understood bureaucracies. She had worked within them. She understood why the relay had responded as it did. The relay had done what it was built to do. The system had processed her signal correctly. She thought about the coalition signal station that had not been configured to receive her frequency. She thought about a person at that station who had received it anyway and had run 3 analysis filters and had then done a calculation that nobody had asked her to do. She thought about a ship that had pushed past its maximum rated speed to find 14 additional minutes. She thought about a medical officer who held a hand. She said to Mensa, who was nearby because Adara had assigned him and Mensa took assignments as commitments rather than instructions, "Why did you come?" Mensa considered this. He was 26 years old. He had been in coalition service for 4 years. He had learned enough in those 4 years to understand that the important questions deserved the time it took to answer them correctly. He said, "Because you asked." Verath looked at him. Others received the signal. "Yes." "They did not come." "No." She looked at the forward display, at the stars moving in the way stars move when you are traveling towards something rather than drifting away from it. "Why you?" she said. It was not quite a question. It was a position she was trying to navigate toward. Mensa thought about Dana Reeves, whom he had never met, at a monitoring station at the edge of space on hour 11 of a 14-hour shift, talking to a cactus. He thought about Adara reading coordinates and moving before the conversation was finished. He thought about his grandmother in her garden, who had told him that the difference between a person and a good person was not about the things you did when someone was looking. He said someone was listening. Verath turned to look at him. She looked at him with the focused attention of someone who has spent 9 days making precise calculations and is now applying that same attention to a different kind of precision. She said, "On our world there is a word. It does not translate cleanly. The approximate meaning is, the one who comes when you have stopped expecting anyone." She paused. "We do not have many stories about who that is," she said. "Most of our stories are about systems that work, about help that comes through the appropriate channels, about authorities that respond." She looked at the display, at the stars. "We do not have many stories about what happens when the systems fail and someone comes anyway." She turned back to Mensa. "We will now," she said. The message from the Concord Council came through at hour 31. Adara was in his ready room when it arrived. He read it. The council formally noted that Commander Adara had conducted operations outside coalition jurisdictional boundaries without proper authorization. The Velhari Cooperative had filed a formal objection to coalition vessels operating in their assigned spatial region. The council requested a full accounting of the decision-making process and informed Commander Adara that a review board would be convened upon his return to station. Adara read it. He thought about the review board. He had been before review boards before. They were thorough and procedurally correct, and they produced, eventually, the same conclusions that good decisions produced, just surrounded by more paperwork and conducted in rooms with worse lighting. He composed his response. It was short. It said, 4 people are alive. My full mission report is attached. I am available to discuss my decisions upon return to station. He sent it. He went back to the bridge. He did not mention it to anyone. At the end of a long day, he stood at the viewport in the quiet of the bridge's night cycle and looked at the stars. The threshold was at standard speed now. There was no longer a reason to push. The math had resolved in the only direction that mattered. He looked at his left hand. He flexed it once, the automatic check, the calibration confirmation that had become a habit years ago and remained a habit now. The prosthetic responded exactly as it always did, exactly as needed, which was what he required of it. Varath Sa came to stand beside him, the appropriate distance, the distance of 2 people who have come through something together and are still learning the shape of what that means. She said, in 4 days we reach your station. Yes, Adara said. And then? Diplomatic transfer to your government for repatriation. They have been notified. He paused. Vethron's research data was recovered from the enduring question systems before we lost power access. 12 years of pulsar cluster observations. It is intact. Varath Sa was quiet. When she spoke, her voice had the quality of something she had been holding carefully and was now setting down. She said, he will want to know that. I know, Adara said. I thought it was worth the 20 minutes. She looked at the stars. The same stars she had watched for 9 days from a failing ship, and entirely different stars now because of what had changed underneath them. She said, the signal I sent, the frequency. I calculated it was the most likely to reach an active receiver. I did not calculate that the receiver would act. Adara said, most wouldn't. But someone did. Someone did. She said, I would like to meet her, the one who was listening. Adara looked at her. He thought about Dana Reeves at a monitoring station at the edge of space, with a cactus named Gerald and 19 years of listening to the dark, and a secondary screen open to a calculation that nobody had asked her to do. I will arrange it, he said. 3 weeks later, a communication request came in on Dana's console. She was on hour 9 of a 14-hour shift. The request came through the standard diplomatic relay, flagged as a personal connection request from a Doreth individual, the name rendered in the translation matrix. She accepted it. The face on her screen was from the deep dark, shaped by a different world and different light, the particular difference of a face you have not seen before but can read anyway because faces are faces, and what they carry is what they carry regardless of where they come from. Varath Sa looked at her across the distance between them. She said, in careful human language that carried the quality of practice in it, you were listening. Dana looked at her. She looked at Gerald on the console. She looked back at the screen. She said, I am always listening. It is my job. Varath Sa said, no, it was your job. What you did was different. Dana did not answer immediately. She thought about hour 11 of a 14-hour shift, a signal that bled in from an adjacent band, the rhythm that made her stop instead of classifying it as interference. Gerald, the calculation on the secondary screen that nobody had asked her to do. She said someone had to hear it. Varath Sa was quiet for a long moment. The distance between them created a delay, but it felt less like transmission delay and more like the pause of someone delivering something they have been carrying carefully and are now placing down in the right place. She said, "On my world we will tell this story, the story of the signal that went to the wrong station, the station that was not supposed to receive it, the person who was listening anyway." She paused. "We will tell it for a long time." But Dana did not know immediately what to say to that. She thought about what it meant for a story to be told for a long time, what it meant for four people to be alive who had not expected to be, what it meant for a navigator to have run the probability calculation and sent the signal anyway because a navigator exhausts every possible heading before accepting there are none. She said, "I hope you tell the part about Adara and Mensa. They did more than I did." Varath Sa said, "We will tell all of it." She looked at Dana directly, the focused attention of a navigator who has fixed on a position and is certain of it. "But it begins with you. It begins with someone listening." The communication ended. Dana sat at her console. Gerald was on the console. The stars were in the viewport. Her next shift started in 5 hours. She would come back and sit down and put on her headset and listen to the dark the way she had listened to it for 19 years, on the off chance that somewhere in all that dark, in all that cold and vast and permanent dark, someone was trying to reach someone and needed the someone to be there. She picked up her coffee. She drank it. It had gone slightly cold while she was talking, and she drank it anyway because cold coffee was still coffee, and she had a pre-shift equipment check to run. She set the mug down. She looked at Gerald. She said, "Good shift, Gerald." She turned back to her console and started the check, because the shift started in 5 hours and there was prep to do, and because that was the job, and because the job, done the way she did it, was not just the job. Outside the viewport, the stars held their positions, cold and permanent, and full of the signals of things that had not yet been heard, traveling at the speed of light through the dark toward whatever was listening. Dana was listening. She always was.